Roland's going to talk deeper in some of the assessment work that was used to put this, to develop all the context and the background that went into the plan and where we were going forward, what our thoughts were. I mean, it was a little over a year ago, we were actually getting all stood up to do a 5-year strategic plan. And then of course, COVID hit, and then we quickly pivoted to do the recovery and resiliency plan that we're going to talk about here. So we released this on the 19th of January, right after the governor's State of the State address. This plan was actually a very much a foundational piece for what the governor used in his State of the State address. And there were a number of elements that were taken out of here that he talked about in this. If you've not seen the plan, a shorter version and a longer version that's on our website that has a whole lot more detail that you can dig into, but we want to kind of go over the highlights. If you go back to the State of the State address and what the governor had talked about, these are kind of the elements, and again, they're built out of this plan. He talked about Nevada job force, working with leading companies, larger companies, you know, kind of frontline companies to help fund, design, and implement training programs. That came out of here. The Small Business Advocacy Center that has already caught traction in the legislative session that, with the Lieutenant Governor's office and the work that they're doing there. We talked about that. Of course, the innovation zones. Innovation zones were not part of this recovery and resiliency plan, but throughout this work, we talk about innovation, entrepreneurship, what the pandemic means for just the wave of opportunities that come in the innovation and entrepreneurship space, and how Nevada is really is propped up to be in a good place to operationalize on folks that have really great ideas. There's some work that needs to be done in this space, and I'm sure Roland will talk about that a little bit too. The governor talked about the energy economy, whether you're talking about storage or low to zero carbon grid, infrastructure, EV supply chains, solar, geothermal, all of this tied to the climate initiative that came out earlier this year as well. We have to be in lockstep with that as we think about moving to 45% carbon free by 2030 and net zero by 2050. He also brought up conversations about data hubs and what that could mean for the state and how we're well positioned for that. Restructuring of INSHE, especially the community colleges. The community colleges are the centerpiece for workforce development and where we need to go as far as rebuilding and also diversifying our economy. A lot of what we talked about in there has to do with the funding formula and thinking about how we support community colleges in these short-term credentials and stackable, transferable certificates of value, what industry is looking for. There's quite a bit of conversation in there about infrastructure, whether it be rail, broadband, roads, multimodal industrial parks, and how that ties into our infrastructure bank that was stood up in 2017 but has never been funded. And so the governor talked about that as well. And then there was some conversation, quite a bit of conversation as well about outdoor recreation and the opportunity that a lot of the state has in that space, especially for our rural communities. Again, this plan was based on the assessment that we worked with SRI on that was put on Governor Sisolak's desk when he came into office in 2019 to really help us understand the state. Very, very robust analysis of both from a quantitative perspective as well as a qualitative perspective with all the focus groups and everything that Roland and his team set up and followed through with. The plan works very closely with Brookings Mountain West. They were contracted in this as well as John Restrepo and RCG Consulting to do all the economic forecasts. Looking at a bunch of different data series, and I'll talk about those a little bit before I turn it over to Roland to kind of set the stage of how we see us moving through this pandemic and what it looks like, at least in the near term, so we get to some version of a new normal and what that looks like. It's been very fuzzy what the new normal is, but it's coming more clarity is coming as we kind of move through this whole thing, and we have some final thoughts on that one as well. The whole point of what we put together here was really to provide options for policymakers, leaders, stakeholders in the state, right? It's an agenda for the whole state, both urban and rural, where GoEd can really operate to provide guidance and direction, you know, for both state and local government, for all the different players, all the different stakeholders in the state. There's 4 primary sections in the plan. Like I said, there's economic forecasts on the front end. There's priorities for immediate action. Those 5 priorities that Roland will talk about, those actually were in the governor's roadmap to recovery that came out in April of 2020, at the end of April, as we were in the early stages of this pandemic. Then there's a set of visionary strategies for the morning, and then capabilities to realize those visionary steps. So
can I just ask people to mute their phones if they're talking with others? Thank you.
Thanks, Cheryl.
Welcome to unmute when you have questions. Sure. Sorry, Bob.
So we all know that the health and the economy definitely are ticely linked, inextricably linked. And as we've moved through the pandemic, what economists call elasticity, it's become much more inelastic. So there's this very direct tie in this inverse relationship between the health health situation and the economy. And as Roland often says, the data is very clear. It's not either or, it's both and, okay, and how this has affected us. I will let everybody know that the governor's office, now that the health situation is largely been going in the right direction, you know, the positivity rate, for example, is around 4%. The World Health Organization wants it at 5% in order to kind of stay in front of it. The vaccine rollout is well on its way. There's a lot more acceptance and adoption of taking the vaccine. So that's been really great. And therefore, the governor's office is really pivoted in talking and working and focusing on the economy going forward. Last week, I think I did 3 different briefings for the governor's office and his staff, talking about where the economy is and how we see things going forward. And I'll talk about that a little bit in the next couple slides. This has been a very interesting set of events. When you think about, so I've also been facilitating weekly calls until recently. We've gone to every other week, economic advisory group calls. And when we first started those calls, the whole study of economics is both, as they say, is both an art and a science. The data, because of just the drastic changes that have happened in the economy, the data is pretty messy, right? There's a lot of error term associated with a lot of the data in this, and because it is so unprecedented, you know, we really have had to focus on the art side of being an economist, to thinking about how economies work, how they work in the different functional areas, whether it's the labor market, whether it's the tourism market, whatever it might be, and to think in terms of, if you do this, this will happen, this will happen. And it's been very, very helpful. And that group has, one of the things I'd asked of them as well is to, you know, provide some forecasts, what they're seeing things looking like going forward, so that we could roll together consensus forecasts on jobs, the unemployment rate, taxable sales, as well as visitor volume. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit here. This obviously was a global situation where Nevada was hit particularly hard, and especially Southern Nevada. And that's even becoming more the case as the numbers start rolling out, as some benchmarking and revisions have been made. If you go back to the Great Recession, there and other recessions, there's always been, you know, on the international scene, there's always been countries that kind of led the way out of downturns, economic downturns. In this case, everybody's been hit by it. So it's kind of been one for all and all for one as we've tried to work through this. And in many regards, it's been very positive to see that happen. For instance, vaccine development and how countries have really worked together on this. There's always differences, but this is going to be one of these things where we're all going to have to pull through this together. So Nevada was absolutely was ground zero in all of this. I went ahead and updated all the numbers. Before I start talking about these, I want to make everyone aware. I talked a little bit about how the data was so noisy. So especially when we talk about the labor market data, every year, Dieter's Research and Analysis Division, they always go through a revision process, a benchmarking process with the job numbers. And that usually occurs about this time of year. They had just finished their benchmarking, I think, week before last. And essentially, we thought we were down 97,000 jobs in the state. We were actually down 165,000 jobs once we went through the benchmarking process. There was a 68,000, little over 68,000 downward adjustment in the job numbers, which lands us right now with a February job total of 1.3 million workers in the state. If you go back to what it was in April of 2020, when we were at the high point, we were at a little over 1,440,000 workers in the state. So we have a big hole right now of dislocated workers, and 94% of the workers right now that are dislocated are in Clark County. So obviously it's really hit the leisure and hospitality industry hard. I put that chart or that line graph down there in the bottom. That kind of goes along with what I've got in that first bullet point. We were all, when they talked about the alphabet recoveries, we were all hoping for a very sharp V recovery. With the mandated closures, you drop off and then you bounce right back again. That is obviously not the case. After we started reopening things in June, things bounced back pretty quickly, and then it really started slacking off. And that's where we are on this slow recovery, especially hitting Southern Nevada in the leisure and hospitality industry. As of February, we've recovered 53.5% of, or about 177,000 of the lost jobs of those 330,000 lost jobs we had. At the beginning of the pandemic, 84% of the lost jobs were in Clark County. Now, as I mentioned, it's at 94% of the unemployed are in Clark County, and it largely goes back to the how exposed the service-based sector is, right? The service-producing sector was down 24.3% versus good producing down 7.6%. If you go to the Las Vegas MSA, there are 292,000 folks that are employed in leisure and hospitality. That's about 28% of all the jobs in Southern Nevada. Huge hit. When you compare that to the Reno MSA, they're at 15.4% of the workers in leisure and hospitality. If I look at the unemployment rate right now, the latest numbers are 8.3% for the state, 9.3% for Las Vegas, and 4.9% for Reno, a little over 5% for Carson City. There's a huge issue, and everybody needs to kind of be aware of the issues that we have with the unemployment rate right now. The models just can't really capture all of the long-term unemployment rate, all the long-term benefit programs for the unemployed for the federal government right now. We've got a large number of folks that are now over a year on unemployment insurance benefits. You have to add, according to the Dieter folks, about 3 to 3.5% to get to the real headline unemployment rate. In November, we were at 12% statewide, and then it dropped down to 8%. That 4% difference, it just doesn't happen that fast. So essentially, this is kind of the story where we're at right now. With the unemployment rate, with re-benchmarking, the estimates right now is that there's 50,000 jobs that just won't be there in the leisure and hospitality industry in Southern Nevada right now. They're just going to go away. And so really trying to figure out ways to help those folks, get them retrained, get them retooled, get them into different career paths is really going to become a priority of our office and the governor's office going forward during this recovery process, and trying to kind of set the baseline going forward for diversification and resiliency efforts, okay? I'm going to go to the last bullet point here on the headwinds here. So when we asked John Restrepo and the folks at RCG to tell us kind of what they were thinking about forecasting going forward, it's very difficult because it was such an unprecedented event. So this is what John did. He looked at these four benchmarks to where they would be to come up with this scenario analysis for his forecast. What the severity of the pandemic would be through the fall and winter and into this year, vaccine availability and efficacy, fear and uncertainty of the consumers and businesses, and what would happen as far as more federal financial relief. The only forecast I'm putting in here, there's a lot more in the report. I encourage folks to go and look at that. You know, whether it be jobs and the unemployment rate, a lot of the tax streams. John made a lot of forecasts in there. I'd go back and look at those. The only one I have in here is the GDP one. And you know, like I said, he used the different scenarios in here. He based those scenarios off of his forecast had there not been a pandemic. So a no pandemic forecast out to the end of this year, and then best case, most likely case, and worst case. Under the best case scenario, he's looking at a 1% below what it would have been had the pandemic not occurred. Going back those four headwinds, essentially COVID would have to remain constant compared to the summer months. We know that didn't happen. The vaccine would have to be pretty much out there by the end of by now in April of this year. We know we still have quite a ways to go on that one, so that one's not really happened either. A small amount of lingering fear with consumers and businesses. That's kind of what has happened, so that one kind of holds up. And an additional enhanced tranche of financial relief from the Fed. And we know that has happened. So the most likely case, which is I think still holds up pretty good right now, is where it would be about 4.8% below what it would have been had the pandemic not occurred, based on the caseloads, based on what the vaccine looks like, and having it fully rolled out by July. That looks like that's probably going to happen. The way consumers and businesses are responding, consumer confidence, business sentiments, those sort of things, and the federal relief. So that one's holding up pretty good based on what he uses those thresholds. Worst case, we don't. That was down 13.2%. That one, that's not going to happen. So that's a positive sign. The one thing I would like to really make clear is all of these numbers and the numbers that we're looking at yet are still based on pumping roughly $21 billion before the American Rescue Plan into Nevada's economy. That absolutely holds up a lot of these numbers and keeps us where we're at right now, whether you're looking at tax revenue streams, whether you're looking at job numbers, whether you're looking at what these GDP forecasts, all of those are. That plays a big role. And there's a lot of difference when you start thinking about economic fundamentals, the difference between money that comes out of Treasury and productivity, okay? And so you really need to keep that in mind. It won't be till this time next year, in my mind, that we're really going to know what Nevada's economic engine looks like and how it's going to be able to stand up and run on its own, and whether we're going to be back at full steam, really moving forward. This is, I believe, the last slide I'm going to talk about, and then I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Stevens. This is the one-page deliverable that we've been sending over to the governor's office out of these econ calls that we've been holding. When we first started doing this, we were doing, so it was March of 2020, and none of us, you know, we thought by March of 2021, a year out, you know, that things would be pretty much back to normal, and they're not there yet. And even the virus, I mean, it's a very fragile health situation yet. There's a number of instances that I even heard this morning of folks that are still coming down with the virus. So that it's not over yet. Anyways, we started, I asked the group to say, okay, so what do you think that the unemployment rate, jobs, visitor volume, and taxable sales are going to look like in March of 2021 as compared to pre-pandemic conditions, okay? Then here a couple, 3 months ago, I said, okay, now let's move this forward. Let's say what it looks like in July, and then what you folks are thinking about it's going to look like by end of year. And that's what I want to focus on is the end of year numbers. That's that bottom right chart there for these different variables. And again, we did this scenario analysis on this, but the estimates that are coming out right now, the forecast from this group, and there's like 8 folks that are contributing to this forecast. And the most likely 6.1% is where the unemployment rate will be by the end of this year. We're still going to be down 2% on the job front as compared to pre-pandemic conditions. Visitor volume is going to be the slowest to return, down 21%, a little over 21% by the end of the year. And taxable sales is still going to be down by almost 2% by the end of the year. And that's the most likely. And again, emphasizing that these numbers, again, are based on a huge amount of federal support that's come into the state. So with that, I'm going to let Roland step in. Just Roland, let me know when you want me to flip the slides and let you start talking about what's in there.
Thanks, Bob. Actually, you sent me the duplicate deck. So why don't, if you stop
okay.
sharing, I'll share, and we'll
Okay.
take it that way.
We'll have questions at the end of this presentation. So if anybody does have questions, we'd like to wait till the end.
I'm going to move fairly quickly. I would like to just emphasize one thing that Bob said. He's talking about where the numbers are. And he has in his slide, he's got a number there, which I always like to look at, which is labor force participation rate. The reality is across the country, and I think it's especially true in Nevada, especially true in Southern Nevada, but true for the whole state, that 2% or more of the prime working age workforce, 24 to 55, have disappeared from the workforce. They're not registered. They're not looking for work. They're gone. That is not a good thing. So in that spirit, I think I got there. Bob, is that the slide? I think that's the slide.
That's it.
And thank you. So going to move quickly at the front end, two chunks in the front end. One, some material from our assessment from before the pandemic statewide, which engaged dozens, actually hundreds of stakeholders over time. And while, of course, much has changed, I think it's still very helpful in framing opportunities for the state. And then also we'll move on to some of the immediate recovery. So you see here, Nevada Action Plan for Recovery and Resilience, there are a bunch of immediate things that had to be done, that are being done, were done. And I think the governor's office and the governor's office of economic development should be congratulated about some of the things that have been done. I will highlight a few things, some weaknesses that the immediate task threw up. I think I'm thinking here particularly community financial institutions. I think Nevada, Southern Nevada particularly, are unbanked, don't have the intermediate financial institutions, with thick intermediate financial institutions that other states have. And turns out those are very important. But as I say, I will skate through that pretty quickly, and then I'll turn to long-term resilience, touching on many things Bob has already mentioned that are put together kind of an integrated way, strategies, and then the capabilities you need to implement the strategies. And I think they represent a framework for Cheryl and your lot to coordinate your thinking around. I know some of you have already heard this, and I don't think any of it will be a surprise to any of you, but it's a useful framework for the future. So with having said that, this is from Rob Lang, and I like this, many of us like this, because it shows very clearly that Nevada has a great location, right? Nevada is very well situated with some of the key economic regions of the Western United States and the Mountain West. Of course, any realtor will tell you location is great, but you've also got to have the relevant improvements to take advantage of that location. So infrastructure for Nevada is very important. There are some other sort of foundational issues which are with the shoe pinches. We know this in Southern Nevada. I think this applies in Northern Nevada as well. The constraints imposed by federal land control and so on. But still, this highlights, I think, in a simple way, the opportunities facing the state. So I'm gonna click through the asset map here. Got an entrepreneurial risk-taking population, still some lack of coordination among the state's innovation system. I know Karsten's on today. I'm sure he can speak to that. I think great work has been done on that. I believe new resources will be available to support that. So that's a specific example of a general phenomenon SRI observed when we did this work. Nevada has innovative workforce programs. Nevada has innovative programs around innovation, very often not coordinated, not integrated. The left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. So the diversification of the economic base has occurred, particularly, of course, we know in Northern Nevada. Data shows it's begun in Southern Nevada, but I believe, Bob will not disagree. Bob will agree as well, and indeed others in leadership in Southern Nevada. This is the turning in the road now for Southern Nevada that Northern Nevada was at the Great Recession, right? Of course, travel will bounce back, but you've just heard from Bob, it's not going to be the same. Business travel will not be the same. All those, for decades, CFOs have been asking their sales force why they had to spend so much money on plane tickets. And they said, oh, we can't sell anything unless we fly around the country. Turns out that wasn't true. And we've run a full test on that. So while there will be, once fear is overcome, there will be recreational travel, there will be event travel. The Consumer Electronics Show will come back. It will be better than ever. But that middling strata of business travel, which is fairly high value, that's not going to come back. And Southern Nevada has to diversify too. Skilled workforce, an enduring challenge. Model programs in Northern Nevada, those need to be scaled up. And quite honestly, I believe after the Great Recession, there were federal programs available to all the states in workforce. Nevada did not get its fair share. So Nevada needs to be on the ball, region, by institution, and statewide when it comes to getting workforce resources. Physical infrastructure, I believe you have actually a very progressive and sort of forward-thinking energy situation. So there's some big opportunities in Northern Nevada in geothermal, and big opportunities in Southern Nevada in, of course, solar. It's very clear now the data is absolutely solid. Solar is going to become ridiculously cheap. It's not simply going to cross over fossil. It is going to become ridiculously cheap. So that has a lot of implications for economic development broadly, manufacturing and other things. Broadband, got to fix connectivity in rural areas, of course, you know that very well. And connectivity is a thick idea. So you need the cell phone connections, you need the glass in the ground perhaps, you need to have redundancy, you need competition amongst providers. That helps ensure that you're hooked up. I mean, I saw someone, I don't know, there was something on the television about, oh, well, connectivity, broadband, that's not infrastructure. Anyone who thinks that at this stage in the 21st century is an idiot who has not been paying attention. Broadband is the same as water and electricity now. So transportation, strong air and road connectivity, that's always been an advantage for the state. So you need to, I do think there's some opportunities, and we know this, you know this, to get the rail connections north-south, because that helps logistics, that turns both Reno Sparks and Las Vegas into a crossroads, and logistics is part of the future of the state. Housing, there is, of course, great pressure on housing. One of the sort of strange features of this crisis has been residential housing has been continued to be bid up, especially at the higher level. I know you felt that acutely in Northern Nevada. Health services have grown. They have not grown fast enough. So health services in Nevada remain an opportunity, right? They remain an opportunity, and health services soak up labor, and they're good wages for skilled work. Education, we know there are some K-12 challenges. Those endure. Recreation, we see that as a big opportunity for the state. Nevada is a marvel. If you want social distancing, come to Nevada. Right? I mean, I think that's something to pay attention to, and the lifestyle entrepreneurs and the kinds of visitors you get. I think that's a shift in thinking at the state level, which has been overdue. Northern Nevada particularly benefit from that. Governance, responsive state offices. It's a small state advantage, I like to call it. Still, that coordination among jurisdictions. A low tax environment, great. Low tax environment, you have some challenges, right? Especially associated with the property tax cap in Southern Nevada and elsewhere, but particularly Southern Nevada, we have challenges funding schools. Land, mentioned that already. Lithium, minerals, big opportunities. I think natural resources, hard rock mining. So things like lithium, not just gold, but lithium and other critical materials are an opportunity for the state. And water remains a constraint generally, but particularly in Southern Nevada. So where does that leave us? Strengths, culture, and quality of life. Nevada is very rich. Southern Nevada is very rich in world-class cultural assets. Outdoor enthusiasts, artists, musicians. That's all part of the quality of life. Governance, there are some advantages. Infrastructure, here we are, we just talked about that, but in the urban areas, connectivity is good. Stable environment, by the way, you don't have much. You have had an earthquake last year, but generally speaking, no earthquakes, no hurricanes. That's a good thing, especially as climate variance increases. So we're concerned about climate change. We think, well, everything's just going to get hotter and hotter and hotter. What you're going to get is you're going to get variance. You're going to get extremes. And if you're not prepared for that, and it appears not just California, but Texas also not prepared for that, that's going to be painful in the future. Generally speaking, Nevada is well prepared for that. That's an advantage. Workforce education, you've got some models, you've got to support it, right? And I know, and I'm just going to beat the drum here a little bit, but the WIN was moved, I think, to Dieter. I'm not sure. I think that's an economic development activity. It needs to be properly funded, needs to be properly used. Model WIN investment in a manufacturing program recently, Haas Manufacturing in Southern Nevada. Weaknesses, still lacking some mentor networks, certain parts of early stage funding missing, right? And still not strong enough connections to the research institutions. Research institutions need to be strengthened along a variety of dimensions. Water rights, rural broadband is a challenge, right? Governance, we've talked about that. Workforce and education. So that's the kind of mix in terms of strengths and weaknesses. And the opportunities are well known, but I think this is where you should focus. Access to West Coast networks, access to Mountain West markets. The Mountain West continues to grow in population, to grow in income, right? Southern Nevada, Las Vegas remains a world brand. And that's incomparable, by the way. There are probably only 3 or 4 cities, right, in the United States that are world brands, right? Some people, in Florida, they think it's Disney World is a city, right? So Las Vegas, New York, Chicago, but not many others. That is an incomparable opportunity. Opportunities for mining diversification. I know that there are land use questions about that. There are water questions, there are environmental questions, but those kinds of natural resources are going to be in great demand in the next 10 years. So, completing the lithium supply chain, lithium mining, and then there's some intermediate processing needs to be done. That is a unique opportunity. Test bed for new technologies. Allow people to come here, spend money on experiments with new transportation, new technologies, and let them have accidents, let them fail, let them do the best they can. Be the place that people from the West Coast or elsewhere take their ideas to scale. It's very hard to do that in other parts of the United States. So Nevada has that opportunity. Be attractive to the millennials and GZ. I think it is in some ways, but the way you attract them is quality of life, right? And frankly, comparatively speaking, compared to the West Coast, Nevada still remains very appealing. Exposure to economic cycles, uncertain federal policies, I think those are important. So some of these things, these threats are beyond your control. And there are other Mountain West states. So every day you've got to wake up and think, what are they doing in Salt Lake City? What are they doing in Phoenix? Because those are your competitors, and they're doing very well, I might add. Let's look at the quick priorities for action. I'm going to go through this very quickly. Immediate recovery. Make sure Nevada agencies are fully integrated in the flow down of federal funds. Good job was done with that, I think. But there is some modernization, and this was featured in the governor's remarks, and it's super important. Modernization of public systems, right? The enterprise system for DEDR, for other financial systems around payments to individuals, and modernize and develop a community banking network. Nevada lost out because, in particular in the South, depended on branches of large commercial banks who honestly weren't invested in the community in the same way a community bank is. That's the fact. Other states did much, much better. Business support, business recovery centers, increased funding for technology-based entrepreneurs. Help Main Street, though. Help any small business. And I know that Director Brown did sterling work with the treasurer and all kinds of business support directly for the immediate recovery. And think about firms in automation and digital technologies. That's a big area, a target industry for the state, target industry of Southern Nevada in particular. I think that it's relevant here too, right? Workforce, radical expansion of health services, right? So in Southern Nevada, I actually don't know the number. For Northern Nevada, it's better, but it's still not good enough. The location quotient for health services is 0.6. Right? So if you're at the national average, you're at 1. So they are far short of the national average. And the truth is, people should be coming to Nevada as visitors, right? Get their knee fixed, play some golf, have a good meal. You could be a destination for health services, but right now you're not. Right now you are importing health services. And by that, I mean people go outside of the state, spend their money to buy their services. So your money goes out and the health service, in a sense, comes in. Fund a community college, accelerated training programs. You have some model programs at Truckee Meadows, but more of that is necessary. And there's some comments about NSHE, which I'll get to in a little bit, but we need to revisit the way funding is the funding formula for the system so as to favor the community college piece. New technologies. Small and medium-sized enterprises have really struggled to adapt to online payments, contactless payments, right? E-commerce. So they need support of that. They've had some support. And then, of course, there are going to be some more technologies which small businesses are going to need in the future around public health. And then finally, data for decision-making. Bob, and this was Bob's personal leadership here, has obtained for the RDAs and indeed for GoEd access to real-time labor market information and a job MC's employment interface, which allows people to find a pathway to job opportunities through a subscription to this service. And that is, I think that's the kind of critical, it sounds expensive. Oh, it cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's nothing, right? If it helps solve the matching problem for people with different skills who are trying to migrate away from jobs that aren't coming back, and they're not, in Southern Nevada in particular, right? To wholly new activities, but activities for which enterprising people with experience in, high touch with social skills can take advantage of. So here, stepping back, are the strategies for the medium term. Sorry, hold on. So strategies for the medium term, sorry about that. As the plan is implemented, we got to think about advanced manufacturing. This is not a broad and deep development, but it is absolutely going to happen. Some manufacturing is going to be reshored, if not to Nevada, not to the United States, it's certainly to North America, and I mean by that I mean Mexico, and perhaps Latin America more generally, certainly Mexico. But around that reshoring will be a growth in logistics, and we know the data for logistics, it grew significantly during the crisis. So employment and wages in the logistics grew. That's a big opportunity for Southern Nevada, but I think it's a big opportunity in Northern Nevada as well. And you have the Fernley multimodal project, which I think is just the right thing. B, a world-class zero carbon economy, and you heard Bob refer that. Renewable energy, the battery supply chain, electric vehicle technologies generally, and autonomy, right? So I think that you're going to see autonomous technologies applied in warehouses, in factories, on streets, every possible application. And of course, there's been a lot of autonomous technology in factories and warehouses in the past, but it's been separated from humans. It's had specialized separate places. In the future, autonomy is gonna be all around you. And let Nevada, Northern Nevada, let your communities be the place where people can pilot and take to scale their technologies in this space. Big opportunity. Health and wellness, talk quite a bit about that, and be a remote work playground, right? There is clearly some people, particularly on the West Coast, particularly in the Bay Area, who don't have to go to work like they used to. They can live anywhere. They might go to Idaho. I hear, in fact, quite a few have. They might go to Texas. There's no reason why they shouldn't come to Northern Nevada. It's a great place to live. What are they looking for? Quality housing, outdoor recreation, arts and entertainment. And the thing about this population is very highly skilled, right? They have an entrepreneurial background very often. They've got serious technology skills. They may be ready to bring their family. They may be ready for a different kind of life. But they represent a tremendous opportunity in terms of human capital when they move. Of course, you'll need jobs for their spouses. So that's the two-spouse question is a big question in this kind of setting. What are the capabilities you need to realize these visions, right? So fully fund the state infrastructure bank. You've heard a great deal, no doubt, from about Washington, D.C. about the infrastructure proposal, very, very large numbers. That's going to get put through the sausage machine in lots of different ways, but money for infrastructure is going to come out the other end. Is Nevada ready to draw down those monies and put them to work, right? Do you have your environmental studies done? Do you have other things done? Sovereign Wealth Fund, this is a pet idea of mine, has been for quite a long time. How you fill it is of course a separate question, but to set aside monies into a separate fund, which could be used to perhaps protect the state against shocks, although rainy day funds are used for that in state level tax and finance. Sovereign wealth fund could be the basis for evergreen venture funds, for supporting technology-based startups in other ways, and so on. One of my ideas is if you have natural resources coming out of the ground, you can take resource rents through the tax system and so fill up your sovereign wealth fund. These are quite common. State of New Mexico has quite a big sovereign wealth fund. In that case, of course, it comes out of oil and gas severance taxes. Other states have sovereign wealth funds. A country of Norway most people in Norway will never have to work again. They've got such a large sovereign wealth fund from again, taxing natural resources. That's one of my pet ideas. So glad to talk about that. Build your local networks for innovation and evergreen funds. So build local evergreen funds to the extent that you can. There may be some monies coming down from the federal government to help do that. Establish a single office, a single door, a single point of contact at the state level for small and medium-sized enterprises. The lieutenant governor, I think, has got the leadership on that, and that's going to be, I think, very helpful. It can't solve every problem for every small business. The point being, though, it's a door to knock on, and you'll be sent to the right place. You'll be matched to the right resources, because SMEs, Bob referred earlier to the sort of distributional consequences. Different people working in hospitality were especially badly hit. Lower income people were especially badly hit by the shock. Small and medium-sized independent businesses especially badly hit by the crisis. So redesign governance funding mechanism, community college system. I can talk a little bit more about that if you like, and follow the statewide climate plan. Bob mentioned that, and that's a badge any state now in the 21st century that's soliciting investment can wear and needs to wear, right, when it's talking to large West Coast technology enterprises and others. So as consumer confidence returns, spending will return. I don't know how quickly that's going to be. Honestly, the level of the speed and efficacy of the vaccine rollout has exceeded my expectations. So I think in terms of the considerations John Restrepo had, we're doing a little bit better on that. Pretty soon, people who want it will have it, and the challenge will be to persuade people who are on the fence to get it. Very important. Business travel will lag. I talked about that. I believe the next few years are going to be we're going to see a lot of innovation. A lot of things got a big kick in the posterior by this shock. Things that took 10 years in the pharma sector were done in 1 year and could have been done in a month. They had that mRNA vaccine fully designed within days after they had got the data from China. They had to go through the normal testing, right, for a new drug, and they should, because everyone should have confidence. They had it within days. That's an incredible world. And that technology, the mRNA technology, messenger RNA, has many alternative uses across healthcare. That's a specific example of many other general things. I just saw an article about talking about automation in warehouses. You can operate forklifts remotely, and they can hire people to sit in their home and drive forklifts, right, from the comfort of their home desk. That's bound to happen, right? If you have trouble getting employment in a relatively remote area. Agriculture, and I know your friend, and I've talked quite a bit with him in the past, Tom Harris, he'll gladly talk about that. Agriculture is going to become heavily automated, even meat processing, food processing, other kinds of things. Supply chains received a tremendous shock. I think there's sort of two things to say about them. One is they actually worked, given the scale of the shock, they did pretty well. Two, however, firms don't want to go through that again. These super taut supply chains, just in time, our delivery within the hour to meet the factory needs. That turned out to be rather painful. So warehouses are kind of back in fashion, and diversification is also going to accelerate. I could go back to my slides if you like, but that's my remarks for now.
So thank you so much, Bob and Roland. I'd like to open it up to our members here attending. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
I guess I do. A question for Bob. One of your very early slides showed the unemployment numbers. It was that graph with the blue line on it. Took that very heavy dive right at the beginning of the pandemic and then showed some recovery. Yeah, that one there. While I can't keep Carson City's numbers right on the tip of my tongue, it seems to be that graph is indicative of simply Clark County not recovering while the rest of the state more or less did. As soon as we got our feet back on the ground and understood where we were, Carson City's unemployment numbers came back, low single digits from before the pandemic. So is that the reality of what we're looking at this chart? Is that just simply Clark County staying behind?
So that's part of the huge challenge that we all faced in this, working for the governor's office of economic development. We have to think about things at the statewide level, just like Roland did when he was working with us on all of this. But absolutely, there's huge regional differences in the state. And you're right. I mean, if we look at just the unemployment rate right now, and we don't have it for Douglas, for instance, but, Carson City's right at 5%, and right. Of course, these are these benchmark numbers. Where Clark is 9.3%, right? So as I mentioned early on, 94% of the unemployed folks right now are in Clark County. And when you have 75%, at least 75% of Nevada's economy, whether you're looking at jobs, GDP, whatever, is located in Clark County, that's where you're going to get a curve like this. Now, that curve would be very different, if we were looking at any one of the other counties in the state. So,
thanks.
Hey, Bob.
Yeah.
Let me add to you. This is something to worry about in Carson City. Clark County generates a lot of funds, state funds for us, and Carson City has a state government, and we're going to go through a budget. It's going to be very lean, so it may not look like it right now, but Carson City could be impacted by a lower state budget, which would mean lower state employment, and even I know some have benefits in that, and that could translate to Carson City in a way that's lagged.
Okay.
So Tom, I think Tom, you're absolutely right. I want to build on that a little bit. I
can probably come on Friday.
If you were to take that curve, even though it's a job curve for the state, and most of those job losses are in Clark County, that curve, because we're all metaphorically speaking, joined at the hip when it comes to fiscal revenue streams, the fiscal situation in our state, that's what we're all looking at, right? At least as far from state funding perspective goes, and whatever comes back to the counties, right? How that works.
Right. We are well aware of the situation where basically Clark County subsidizes the rest of the state, because they're, just in their sales taxes are seriously way more than the rest of the state put together. So here in Carson City, we are keeping a very close eye on that. Our budgeting process, which we're going through, just like all the other counties, makes some adjustments for that. Yeah. So we see the the actual dollar bills that are headed for the bank account, but we also realize they may not actually get there.
Well, and one of the challenges that we're quite frankly, even during this legislative session, it's been very interesting watching legislators from different parts of the state, you know, where their worldview is based on the region that they live in, and therefore, you know, the policies and the priorities and where they're coming from. You really have to think about other parts of the state if you're talking about making statewide policy, right? Because it affects everybody, and because there are so many differences. Making policy decisions about conditions that are in northern Nevada that directly affects southern Nevada, that's in a very different place economically, may or may not be appropriate, right? And so it's something, I appreciate those comments, because we all have to consider everybody across the state when it comes to this recovery process, because we are all tied at the hip.
Well, and that's one thing Carson City has been able to do over the years, particularly putting our industrial area together out north of the airport. Our job base is fairly diverse to begin with, and our manufacturing and production is very diverse as well. So we feel like we're in a good position, but we also see the perils as Thomas was talking about.
Are there any other questions amongst the group? I saw so many recommendations in here that are interfacing with all of our work. Aaron, go ahead.
So I guess I just wanted to touch on, as it's really a function of the legislative session that's going on right now, but a concern that is kind of jumped up as it relates to the climate action plan. And I mean, I know that obviously all of us need to do our part and work towards energy efficiency and doing what we can to benefit the environment. But I just, in terms of making that a priority from an economic development perspective and trying to impress, you know, California tech companies to come over, because we're gonna out climate change everybody else, is a little troubling. And I guess my biggest frustration comes from the fact that climate action plan was literally put together over the course of 2 months. It was announced in September, and by November they had adopted this climate action plan that calls for everything to go to zero, you know, net zero by 2050. And what that did was then empower legislators to say, okay, well, let's go make that happen. To the point that we had, you know, a bill that, let's cross our fingers, we think we have it dead at this point, but it literally would have phased out, you know, natural gas use. It would not have allowed for the contemplation of any of the renewable natural gas opportunities. It would have literally just called for the phase out of natural gas into beneficial electrification over a period of time, and which would have impacted, you know, all of our homes and businesses. And I would encourage folks to really dig into, you know, Nevada has a greenhouse gas inventory, and they're tracking that, right, so that they can use it to relate back to this climate action plan. And literally over the last 15 years, the state's added 700,000 people, over 200,000 houses, and millions of, you know, tens, if not hundreds of millions of square feet of commercial space. And our natural gas consumption literally only went up from 4% to 4.4%. And I say that as it's only 4% of our greenhouse gas contribution, but yet it's emboldening these folks to, you know, to try and target them. So I think I just get nervous about the cost and the impact to our communities if we really, you know, try to follow through on the literal interpretation of the climate change study.
So I guess, Aaron, I would add into all of that. I agree with you. A huge part of our role and what was in this recovery and resiliency plan is awareness and education, and so that there's an understanding and a knowledge base, data-driven knowledge base in many cases, for leadership to make decisions going forward in a whole host of different lanes, to really think about if you do this, what are the unintended consequences of that, right? And I think that should be a key role of all of us to make sure that all of these ideas, these thoughts, these processes are very well thought out, thinking about where we were, where we are, and where things are going in light of all of the changes that have just been magnified over the last year or so. So yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, just to pile on there, you know, the longer term prize, right, it involves several dimensions, right? And particularly if we want to electrify everything, to use a phrase, that could be slowed down, right? If by transitioning away from natural gas, which is it's a transitional fuel, right, from the point of view of climate change. But of course, it's much better than coal as an alternative. And if we go away from that too much, you could have some, you have some limitations on power, limitations on grid stability, and your other purposes around electrification would thereby be derailed. So these things are complicated, right? And you certainly want to understand that the path in the short run from here to get to the long run that we all have in mind, I think we all share, needs to be carefully thought through. There's some substantial investments, and I know that they're being worked on by NV Energy in transmission, which have to be made to ensure a reliable source of other renewables in addition to solar and perhaps geothermal. So, but those, needless to say, transmission across Nevada, you can't snap your fingers and get that done quickly. So that's all I'd say for now.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Any other questions amongst our group? Marlene, unmute yourself.
Thank you. First off, thank you for the presenters. It was very informative, and I have a great hope for the future for Nevada. So I'm excited. I hope that was a good takeaway message, because that's what I feel. I wanted to follow up on one main point, just for a clarification. You talked about rebuilding financial and institution capabilities, and then you talked specifically about modernizing a community banking network. I guess my question is this occurring at the state level, or is this something that we could do from a regional perspective? How do we go about doing that, or is something being done on that front?
So Bob can talk to the state context. You need states. So banks are regulated typically often by the states, not entirely, and you need a permissive regulation. And I do not know what the situation is in Nevada. Bob can speak to that, but certainly you can grow your community banking network locally, and you should, right? And it's done elsewhere. And maybe they're co-op banks, maybe they are community banks. They've always been an indispensable piece. The crisis proved more than ever how important they are. So that could be a to-do for you guys. But Bob may have something, I think, substantive to say about the state context.
Yeah, and Marlene, I'm not totally up to speed on all that, so I don't want to go into too much detail on that. Where this whole conversation really began was early on, trying to get out the EIDL and PPP loans through the SBA program. That's where it really came to light. So, and how the wraparound services that community banks had provided, it was just really night and day at the service side of the community banks and what they were doing and how we wanted to try going forward.
Thank you. The reason I bring that up is through the NEEP program that we're doing across the state. This is something that we've talked about, that people don't have community local banks. So I don't know, is that kind of grassroots up, or does that come from the grass tops down, and how to go about building that? But bigger issues, but I was just curious.
Well, you, Buddy, and I, let's work on that, because I think a lot of that we could do from the grassroots up, and it would tie in very nice with NEEP.
We could also, just as a sidebar, we could add that into our financial team's recommendations as a part of the ERR plan.
Good idea.
That would be grassroots up, but we'd need to know more about how it happens.
Okay. Yeah, great ideas. Thank you again.
Jan, do you have a question? Nope.
No, I do not.
Okay, sorry. Is there anybody else have questions? I know that we have several members of our council representatives here, as well as members of our council. And I can't tell you how much I greatly appreciate all of your volunteer efforts in helping with this process. And I don't know if you all saw it, but I saw lots of opportunities to interface our work. And I saw so many similarities to what we have already identified as solutions as we move forward. So I just want to again thank you so much, Bob and Roland, for your time and your work. I know it's been 24/7. I do appreciate you taking your capes off for this presentation. But you have been supermen, and same with Thomas and Marlene. Just appreciate all of your help with our process, and all the council reps and our council team members here. Thank you so much. This recording will be put onto our website that you can access. Oh, Maurice has another question, right? Maurice?
I was just going to ask if this was available, so
Yes.
I'll lower my hand and shut up.
Yeah, no, we'll make this available on our website. It might take a couple of days, but it'll be there. And I just thank you all so much for your work and your commitment to your communities and leadership. We're all very proud of your work and your efforts. Thank you so much. That ends our presentation today.
Thanks, Cheryl.
Bye, Roland. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Cheryl. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.